Every tear the girl cried would turn into a diamond. That's why she was hidden away in a cold, damp basement since she was a child. Whenever her father's business failed, he would go to her. Then, he would use all sorts of methods to force her to cry. With this, he became an unbeatable legend in the business world, because no matter how many times he went bankrupt, he could always make a comeback. When Marcia woke up from a nightmare, countless unfamiliar memories flooded her mind. The screams from the basement were especially clear, but she distinctly remembered she was just taking her niece to school a second ago. As the memories merged, Marcia knew she had traveled into another world. She had even become the villainous older sister of the novel's heroine. In the original book, although she didn't personally bully her sister like her father and brother did, she often ordered her nanny to collect the diamonds. This continued until one day, 3 years later, when the male lead appeared. All the family members who had bullied Larissa met a tragic end. To confirm if she had really transmigrated, Marcia decided to go to the basement and see for herself. A maid tried to stop her. "Your leg injury hasn't healed yet, you shouldn't be walking around." Marcia pushed her away almost instinctively. Only then did she realize what she had done. Could it be that the soul of this body hadn't completely vanished? "What are you standing there for? Get out!" The maid let out a sigh of relief, quickly curtsied, and left. At this point, Marcia couldn't be bothered by her own strange behavior. Following her memory, she took the third book from the shelf, and just as she expected, she found a set of keys inside. Marcia's soul was trembling. The reason she had always lived on the top floor of the castle was to be as far away as possible from the basement where her sister was imprisoned. After all, she was one of the culprits who had harmed Larissa. With a determined expression, Marcia pushed open the door, ignoring the resistance from the other soul. What met her eyes were damp, dilapidated furniture, and an indescribable rotten stench. Finally, she saw the trembling Larissa. In that moment, Marcia's heart was in turmoil. What kind of father could be so cruel? To treat his 6-year-old daughter as a cash cow? Perhaps this was why the original Marcia was unwilling to come to the basement. But speak of the devil, her father, Robert, actually showed up. Panicked, Marcia didn't know what to say. Luckily, he seemed to be in a hurry. After a few pleasantries, he ushered her out. Marcia was puzzled by her father's strange behavior. When she heard the sound of a stick hitting something behind her, accompanied by shouts, "Cry for me! Cry now!" A chill ran down Marcia's spine, and she quickly turned around, just in time to see her father swinging the stick. On the ground, Larissa was lying prone, trembling. Marcia really couldn't hold it in anymore. How could such scum exist in the world? Just then, the sound of gems hitting the floor was heard. It turned out Larissa had finally given in to the pain and started crying. Robert was overjoyed, his eyes instantly filled with greed. Like a dog, he got on the floor and searched meticulously, afraid of missing a single diamond. Now he had the capital to make a comeback again. "I'm leaving first, don't you overdo it either." He clearly thought Marcia was just like him, watching the nanny treat Larissa's wounds. The thought of leaving this home grew in Marcia's mind. But what about her sister right in front of her? Was she supposed to let her be tortured for another 3 years? Powerless, Marcia was in a terrible mood. So much so that she didn't even notice the maids walking towards her. I'm sorry, miss, we didn't mean to." Marcia felt a surge of anger rising from within, but her reason ultimately prevailed and she didn't lash out. However, her leniency made the maids whisper among themselves. And what was more incredible was that she could actually hear their thoughts. But they were clearly far away. What was going on? Just then, a handsome man burst into the house. He was Marcia's brother, Roger, handsome on the outside but a gambler. And the siblings had a very bad relationship. "What are you looking at? Can't you greet your own brother when you see me?" "Forget it. I don't have a gambler for a brother." Ridiculous! Compared to a father who constantly loses money in business, don't I have a better chance of winning at gambling? After saying that, Roger announced he was going to visit his dear little sister. Marcia knew Larissa was about to get beaten again, and she could no longer suppress her anger. She couldn't help but say sarcastically, "Did Mother give you the ability to not get drunk just so you could hang out in casinos?" It turned out the 3 siblings' mother was an elf, which was why the children had awakened different divine powers. Only Marcia, so far, didn't know what her special ability was. Enraged, Roger was about to strike her, but on second thought it was more profitable to go squeeze out some diamonds. Feeling someone pull him from behind, he couldn't take it anymore and was about to teach Marcia a lesson. "Are you trying to destroy our source of wealth? Father was just there. If you go again, she'll die for sure." After saying that, Marcia took off her most valuable earring. "Take it. This should be enough for you for a while." Roger took it and finally stopped pestering her. Marcia patted her chest in lingering fear she had almost been hit. For the entire afternoon, Marcia couldn't think of a perfect solution. Now, her only hope was for the male lead to appear quickly. In that case, wouldn't it be just as effective if she took Larissa to find him herself? Having decided on a plan, Marcia began searching the library for information about this world. To her annoyance, she couldn't find anyone who fit the description, until a familiar family crest caught her eye. "That's it! This young man named Fabian Laurent was the male lead. Now everything was ready. All she had to do was wait for her leg to heal. 4 days later, the original owner's soul finally disappeared completely, and Marcia finally understood her special ability. It was telepathy, but of course, limited to only negative thoughts. No wonder the original Marcia was unwilling to interact with others. However, this was actually beneficial for her escape plan. That night, Marcia went to the basement alone, bringing cookies with her. Noticing Larissa was trembling, she kept her distance and said gently, "I mean no harm. If it's okay, could you show me your face?" After confirming there was no danger, Larissa finally peeked her little head out. Marcia's heart softened, and she began to tentatively communicate with her. But Larissa remained silent. It seemed her psychological trauma was very severe. Fortunately, she could still nod to express her wishes. So, Marcia first used cookies to win her over, then squatted down and told her about her escape plan. Early the next morning, Marcia deliberately messed up her hair, and then let out a blood-curdling scream. Her personal maid rushed upstairs to check, but was met with a barrage of scolding. "How did my dress get torn? Was this your doing?" I'm sorry, it really wasn't me. Go get a carriage. I'm taking this to the tailor's to be mended myself, and as punishment you are not to call for any help." With that, Marcia had completed the first step of her plan, and because it was so early, the carriage arrived without disturbing anyone. Even if someone brought it up later, her earlier act would buy her a lot of time. Meanwhile, the owner of the tailor shop had just woken up when an unexpected visitor arrived. "I have some torn clothes that need mending. Price is not an issue, but it must be done quickly. Also, you can go back first. I'll wander around the city for a bit and return on my own." After the servant left, Marcia suddenly became very emotional. She then lied, claiming she had run away from home to escape a marriage. The owner unconsciously leaned back. What did this have to do with her? But then Marcia suddenly knelt on the ground and begged for her help. "Help me call a carriage from the back door, and give me a set of old clothes," looking at the heavy gold coins in her hand. The owner ultimately couldn't resist the temptation. She even gave her the rattiest clothes in the shop. After changing carriages 5 times, Marcia quietly got out in a remote forest. She was worried that any more delay would be too much for Larissa to bear. But when she unzipped the trunk, she found the girl's eyes were vacant, showing no sign of discomfort or complaint. The more she looked at this well-behaved sister, the more she liked her. She even gave her own sun hat to her. Fortunately, Marcia had planned ahead. The place where they got off was not far from a small town. A day's walk would get them to the male lead's Laurent family estate. "Tell me what you'd like to eat. Here's the menu." Seeing Larissa remain silent, as if she were deaf and mute, Marcia felt a sting in her nose. "Don't worry. Once we get to the Laurent family, you won't have to worry for the rest of your life. You'll have plenty to eat and drink, and someone who will love you forever." Mumbling to herself, Marcia didn't notice someone was watching her. He had a pair of rare red eyes. When Marcia turned around, he had already looked away. But even that brief glimpse was enough to shock her. Although the man's clothes were shabby, he was incredibly handsome, not losing out in the slightest even compared to her brother with his elven blood. "How dare she run away with my cash cow? I definitely won't let her off this time." Thanks to her ability, Marcia sensed her father's arrival in advance. In the critical moment, she had no time to think. She pulled Larissa and hid under the table. Now she could only pray that the man at the next table wouldn't betray them. But what she feared came to pass. Robert went directly to the mysterious man to ask. Hearing that demonic voice, Larissa became extremely nervous. But there was nothing Marcia could do. Just when she thought it was all over, the mysterious man said, "I haven't seen the 2 people you're talking about. Perhaps they left here a long time ago." Hearing this, Marcia and Larissa finally breathed a sigh of relief. But at this time, a waiter came over carrying the dishes they had ordered earlier. Marcia could faintly hear his thoughts. What kind of people are these, ordering food and then just leaving? Just then, the man spoke again. "Just put the dishes aside for now. We'll get them after we're finished." Robert instantly became suspicious and started questioning him. "We're big guys. What's wrong with ordering a few extra dishes?" With someone paying, the waiter was of course happy to oblige, quickly saying, "Indeed, these are the 2 gentlemen's dishes." Anxious, Robert didn't waste any more time there. Marcia waited until she was sure her father had left before coming out with her sister. She wanted to thank the man, but he said, "No need. I was just afraid your ruckus would ruin my appetite." Faced with such a strange person, Marcia gave up on trying to talk to him. Afraid their father might return, the 2 took a few bites and prepared to leave. Walking on a crowded street would be much safer. Still, Marcia used her ability at full strength just in case. And unexpectedly, she actually overheard a secret. "Just 1 stab and I'm gone. Then I'll never have to go hungry again." A life was at stake. Marcia couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Soon, she locked her eyes on a little boy. Coincidentally, his target was the mysterious man who had helped her. And from the way they were talking, the man was completely unguarded. If she didn't intervene, the kid might actually succeed. "Hey, little guy with a hat, come here a second." The boy's face changed, thinking he had been exposed. But Marcia didn't point it out. She just gave 2 gold coins. and added a light scolding, "Where are your manners? Don't you know to receive with both hands?" Feeling the eyes on his back, the boy knew he couldn't succeed now. "It's all that ugly woman's fault. I was planning to get rid of this kid too after it was done." Marcia suddenly turned back but saw nothing. It seems this little guy was just a pawn. Because of her good deed, Marcia arrived at the train station a little late. The ticket seller impatiently told her all the tickets were sold out. Just as she was racking her brain for a way to travel, the mysterious man suddenly appeared and invited her to travel with them. Afraid he had ulterior motives, Marcia naturally didn't dare to agree. But when she learned they were thanking her for what happened in the square, and hearing no other malicious thoughts, Marcia agreed. As the train slowly started to move, the two sisters had finally, temporarily, escaped the shackles of their fate. Afterwards, they introduced themselves. The man with glasses, named Pratt, was an assistant. Beside him was the young master, Arno, facing this peculiar girl who was staring right at him. Arno asked a bit awkwardly, "Why do you keep staring at me?" Marcia gave an awkward, closed-mouth smile and said casually, "You're very handsome." But deep down, she still couldn't completely trust him. But then Arno suddenly turned serious. "May I be so bold as to ask why you are going to the Grand Duke's residence?" Marcia was startled. How could he know? When she learned she had let it slip at the restaurant, Marcia had no choice but to admit it. Arno pressed on, "You still haven't told me why." "Because my Larissa is destined to be the Grand Duke's wife." For some reason, Arno suddenly burst into unrestrained laughter. Marcia ignored his strange behavior, concerned only if Larissa was feeling unwell, but her reaction was still frighteningly cold. It could only be said that she hadn't yet opened up her closed-off heart. Pratt asked with concern, "Has your sister suffered some kind of psychological trauma?" Marcia didn't want to say much, only replying, "She'll be fine once she meets His Grace, the Grand Duke." After all, that's how the happy ending goes in fairy tales. Beside her, Arno suddenly had a pang of conscience. He sincerely apologized and said he would personally take them to the Laurent estate. Although Marcia didn't believe him, she still smiled and expressed her thanks. However, as the train pulled into the station, she saw a carriage bearing the Laurent family crest. In a daze, they quickly arrived at their destination. This was the family of the male lead from the novel, looking at the maids lining the path to welcome them. Marcia thought to herself, he couldn't be the legendary Grand Duke, could he? But isn't the male lead's name supposed to be Fabian? In any case, Marcia felt like jumping into a river right then, so she couldn't help but ask Pratt about Arno's identity, but he replied that he was not the Grand Duke. Relieved, Marcia entered the reception hall. A servant bowed and said with a smile, "His Grace the Grand Duke will be here shortly," thinking that her sister would soon find her happiness. Marcia couldn't help but show a fond, knowing smile. She was even in the mood to taste the cookies here. But when the real Grand Duke appeared, she was stunned. Her sister's fated true love was actually an old man. But according to her research, the male lead was indeed the Grand Duke of the Laurent family. Marcia had to test the waters, calling out, "Are you Grand Duke Fabian?" The old man didn't answer, merely ordering his subordinate to call Fabian over. Seeing this, Marcia finally breathed a sigh of relief. When she saw the familiar handsome man with red eyes, she exclaimed in shock, "Didn't you say your name was Arno?" "Actually, my full name is Fabian. I only use the name Arno when I'm traveling." Marcia froze on the spot. So he was her sister's true love after all. It was just that since the old Grand Duke was still alive, Fabian had not yet inherited the title of Grand Duke. Perhaps feeling unwell, the old Grand Duke chatted for a bit and then left. "Did you deliberately not tell us your real name?" Fabian smiled and nodded. "After all, I was also afraid you might have ill intentions towards the duchy." Although what he said made sense, Marcia was still a little angry, but for the sake of her sister's future happiness, she endured it. For some reason, Marcia suddenly felt the atmosphere was a bit strange. What did they mean by staring at her like that? And from the look on Fabian's face, it wasn't love at first sight. Marcia suddenly realized she might have arrived too early. But if she hadn't done this, Larissa would have had to endure 3 more years of darkness. At that moment, Marcia made up her mind. If father wouldn't take care of her sister, then she would. "Your leg injury hasn't healed yet, has it? You can stay here for a few days before you leave." Marcia didn't expect him to ask her to stay. "Don't overthink it. I just don't want to see you get captured by bad people." After saying that, Fabian looked at Larissa. An idea flashed in Marcia's mind. Could this be love born from pity? But the next second, Fabian's inner voice came through. This child is so pitiful to have such a strange sister. And so, the two sisters had a new place to stay. That night, after lulling Larissa to sleep, Marcia's mind started to wander. If Fabian is about to inherit the title, then his grandfather is probably in danger. Just then, a commotion was heard outside the door. Pressing her ear to the door, Marcia faintly heard someone shouting for a doctor. Meanwhile, the Grand Duke had fallen into a coma. Although Fabian immediately brought a doctor, it wasn't very effective. What annoyed him even more was that his uncle's family had also arrived. They never showed any filial piety and were just waiting to inherit the estate. They even cursed Fabian, calling him an eyesore of a bastard child picked up from the streets. His aunt was even more direct, saying, "Only my husband can inherit the family fortune." She even brought her only daughter along to curry favor with the old man. But Eloise, it seemed, was obsessed with looks, and actually started to have ideas about Fabian. Just then, the family lawyer suddenly announced, "The Grand Duke has drafted a new will." This made the uncle's family's faces change drastically. They had a bad feeling in their hearts, so they immediately summoned their youngest son, Richard. "You're just in time, my dear cousin. You must have bewitched grandfather into changing the will. I won't let you get away with it. Get it all out now, or you won't have another chance." That night, the Grand Duke of Laurent passed away. However, his family only cared about the will. As the notary read the contents of the will, the uncle's family looked exceptionally grim. And then, their worst fears came true. The old Grand Duke had actually left the entire inheritance to Fabian. Of course, there was a condition: he had to marry and have a child within a year. Unwilling to accept this, the uncle shot up from his seat. Fabian, having anticipated this, slightly sidestepped him, seeing her father fall to the ground in a pathetic heap. Eloise actually volunteered herself, saying, "Let's get married." This nearly made her mother faint with rage. Fabian had a headache. This family really deserved to die. In truth, Fabian's mother was a witch, which is why Fabian has a pair of red eyes. And the reason he wanted to seize the title of Grand Duke was to destroy this filthy family. But before that, he had to complete the old Grand Duke's task to secure his position. His assistant, Pratt, suggested it would be safest to find someone who poses no threat. And as it happens, we have just such a person right here in the manor. The image of Marcia couldn't help but appear in Fabian's mind. The next day, he proposed to Marcia. "Dear Miss Marcia, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Marcia's face turned pale as she shouted, "No way!" Fabian smiled. "You said no way, not I don't want to, right?" Seeing that she was still unwilling, Fabian tried to tempt her with wealth and splendor, saying that even if she tarnished the reputation of the Grand Duchess after marrying, it wouldn't matter. Marcia was no fool. She immediately asked him what his real objective was. When she learned that Fabian was only doing this to fulfill his grandfather's task and secure the title, Marcia fell into deep thought. According to the fairy tale, his wife was supposed to be her sister, Larissa, but to escape their father's clutches, they had met 3 years early. Thinking of this, Marcia couldn't help but ask, "Can I divorce you at any time in the future?" Fabian was overjoyed and said with a smile, "Anytime you want after a year." Actually, Marcia's idea was simple. Since the sisters were at a dead end, she could tie down the male lead for 3 years and then return him to her sister. It was a perfect plan that served both purposes. Of course, she didn't agree to it immediately. Before that, Marcia had to ask for Larissa's opinion. For some reason, every time she saw her sister, she could always see the shadow of her niece from her past life in her. "Dear sister, do you have that love at first sight feeling for Lord Fabian?" Unfortunately, Larissa, who had long sealed her heart away, couldn't speak at all. Or rather, she was too afraid of the outside world to speak. Nevertheless, Marcia told her about her plan. Just then, she noticed her sister was clutching something in her hand. So she kindly said, "What's that in your hand? Do you need me to help you wash it?" But Larissa still showed no reaction. Not wanting to force her, Marcia decided to leave first. But then, Larissa uncharacteristically opened her hands. Marcia was shaken. Wasn't this the handkerchief she had given her? It turned out that without her realizing it, Larissa had come to see her as her only support. Marcia's nose felt sore, and suddenly she felt like crying. She went forward and hugged her sister tightly. She swore she would never let anyone hurt her sister again. The next day, as promised, Marcia went to find Fabian and gave him a marriage contract. Most of the clauses were about protecting Larissa. And of course, the most important one was no physical contact with her. She didn't want to accidentally ruin her sister's happiness. "If you have any other conditions, you can write them down too." Fabian picked up the quill from the table and then began to write with a scratchy sound. As expected, his conditions were unusually lenient. "Actually, you don't need to worry, because I'm planning to adopt a child when the time comes." Marcia felt a bit awkward. This guy really didn't pull any punches. Indeed, beneath his handsome exterior was a very deep and calculating mind. After they both agreed on the terms of the contract, Fabian slowly stood up and finally performed a formal knight's vow. "Beautiful Miss Marcia, so, will you be my wife?" Although she knew it was just an act, Marcia's heart still skipped a beat. Looking at the pigeon egg-sized diamond ring, she was always reminded of Larissa's tears. So for her sister's sake, she gladly said, "I do." According to Fabian, this ring was passed down through generations of Grand Duchesses. Miraculously, the size of the ring was a perfect fit for her hand. This custom-made feeling was truly magical. Afterwards, Fabian summoned his assistant, Pratt, and drafted a document to the royal family requesting permission for the marriage. As long as he returned with the royal seal within 3 days, Marcia would become the legal mistress of the Grand Duke's household. However, Fabian also warned that these 3 days would be exceptionally dangerous. So it would be best if you and your sister do not leave the manor. After all, there were too many people in this family who didn't want him to become the Grand Duke. The following days were calm and pleasant. Every day, Marcia would read fairy tales to Larissa. She hoped these beautiful stories would open her closed-off heart. Just then, Marcia suddenly heard some unpleasant thoughts. Honestly, acting like a young master every day, expecting to be served like a lord, how did this brat end up in the guest's room? Marcia suddenly had a bad feeling. She quickly hid Larissa in the room. Be a good girl, sister. I have to take care of something and I'll be right back. As a set of footsteps approached, as expected, Fabian's cousin Richard came looking for them. He first looked around, then said in an unfriendly tone, "You can leave this place now." Marcia's smiling face instantly stiffened. When she heard him claim to be the Grand Duke Laurent's grandson, she sneered. As far as I know, Fabian is the Grand Duke's actual grandson. Hearing this, Richard flew into a rage, yelling, "How is that witch's spawn worthy?" It was only then that Marcia remembered his identity. Meanwhile, Richard was about to lose his temper. Are anyone daring to provoke me now? Marcia felt helpless against this kind of spoiled brat. All she wanted now was for him to leave quickly. But Richard noticed the 2 sets of tableware on the table. Marcia didn't want to reveal Larissa's presence and was very annoyed. What was even more infuriating was that he shamelessly refused to leave. Just then, there was a sound from behind. The tyrannical Richard suddenly felt his heart stop beating. Seeing her sister peek out from behind, Marcia quickly went to her and asked, "Were you scared being in the room all by yourself?" Seeing Richard asking for her sister's name, Marcia quickly stood in front of her. She had no good feelings towards this spoiled brat, and naturally didn't want him to get close to her precious sister. She casually made up an excuse that her sister had a cold and wasn't feeling well. But Richard persistently said he could call for a doctor. Although Marcia tried her best to block his view, Richard still managed to get a few good looks at Larissa. Indeed, for every person, there's someone who can tame them. The arrogant and insufferable Richard had completely fallen in love. Marcia thought her obstruction would make him give up. But soon after, a maid delivered an invitation from Richard. It turned out he wanted to invite them both to a dinner party the next day. For this, Marcia naturally had to ask for Fabian's opinion. But he nonchalantly said, "If you don't want to go, don't force yourself." But Marcia was worried he would be persistent. What if he came looking for them directly and harassed Larissa? Hearing this, Fabian said bluntly, "Why don't we just change rooms then?" When she learned Fabian would also be attending, Marcia immediately changed her tune. "It's fine, you'll protect me, right?" Fabian stared at her for a long time. "Don't worry, once the marriage certificate arrives in a few days, you'll be safe." The only thing that made her feel awkward was, it seemed she didn't have a single formal gown to wear. Unexpectedly, that very afternoon, Fabian had someone deliver a large pile of gifts. Ostensibly, it was an apology for the poor hospitality these past few days. But Marcia knew he was just trying to save her face. Of course, the first person she thought of when she saw the nice things was Larissa. And looking at the material of the clothes, it was obvious they were all top-quality items. However, what she didn't expect was that Richard had also sent a pile of gift boxes. When Marcia opened them, she felt a sharp pain in her heart. This brat's taste is truly awful. To think he wants my Larissa to wear such tacky clothes. She threw them aside without hesitation, and then dressed her sister in the clothes Fabian had sent. Now this is what a lovely young noble lady looks like. Larissa, I hope you can have more things that belong to you, and that you can cry and laugh like a normal child. But there's no need to rush. I will be with you as you slowly adjust. After Marcia's long-term care, a glimmer of life finally appeared in Larissa's eyes. As a child, to escape the pain of her father's daily beatings, she chose to completely seal off her heart. But these past few days, she could feel the warmth and call of the outside world, from a kind girl named Marcia. But she didn't understand why this person was so good to her. Perhaps one day, when she figures it out, she will also be able to speak. At the Laurent family dinner that night, Marcia ultimately chose to leave Larissa behind and attend by herself. She was unwilling to let her sister suffer even the slightest bit of danger. Having done her homework beforehand, she recognized the person sitting next to her as Fabian's cousin Eloise. Just then, someone slammed their hand on the table. "Didn't I invite both of you? Why didn't Larissa come?" Marcia was speechless. This little brat had actually slicked back his hair to look mature. Richard's outburst caught his mother's attention. "Who is this girl? Her plain clothes really suit Fabian," Richard stammered, not knowing how to describe her. Marcia took the opportunity to introduce herself, just a distant cousin of Lord Fabian. "So you're not close then? Do you think it's appropriate for you to attend a Laurent family dinner? As if I'm very close with you?" Fabian's interjection startled Eloise. Noticing his glance telling her to eat in peace, Marcia smiled. It felt great to have someone looking out for her. But soon, she couldn't take it anymore. The minds of this group of people were filled with nothing but negative thoughts, so Marcia simply pretended to be sick and coughed a few times, which, as expected, earned her a disgusted look from Eloise next to her. With this excuse, she was able to escape the boring banquet. The thought of having to spend 3 years with these people was enough to drive her crazy. Nothing can go wrong. I have to give the dessert on the left to young Master Fabian. Why do I have to do this? What if I get implicated? In that instant, countless thoughts flashed through Marcia's mind, especially Fabian's aunt. There was clearly something wrong with her gaze, so she deliberately bumped into the maid with force. The desserts on the tray immediately scattered all over the floor. Seeing Fabian bend down to help her up, she immediately took the opportunity as she was getting up to warn him. Someone is trying to harm you. From now on, don't eat any more food. Fabian remained expressionless, only telling her to go back and rest well. Watching the maid cleaning up, her eyes turned sharp. He thought to himself, these people really don't deserve to live. It was a gloomy, rainy day, the day of the Grand Duke Laurent's funeral. Since Marcia had accepted Fabian's proposal, she was naturally considered a part of the Laurent family. But the others didn't know this. Eloise even mocked her, asking if she was trying to climb the social ladder by getting with her brother Fabian. Only Richard showed her a trace of kindness. Marcia happily stood up to greet him, but Richard was absent-mindedly looking around. She laughed and asked, "Are you looking for Larissa?" His thoughts guessed. Richard's face turned beet red. He vehemently denied it while fleeing in embarrassment. Now Marcia was bored once again. Just then, she noticed Fabian in the crowd, and it looked like he was on very good terms with a red-haired man. Marcia, who was about to go and say hello, had to stop. As the funeral officially began, she reverently offered her flowers. "Hello, Grandpa Duke. I'm your granddaughter-in-law by proxy. I hope you rest in peace." After the ceremony, Marcia was having tea in the rest area, but the negative thoughts from all around were too noisy. Helpless, she had to go out to the balcony for some fresh air. Unexpectedly, Fabian came looking for her. Marcia had just said a few words when she heard the terrifying sound of a gunshot. In an instant, her hands were covered in hot blood. Fabian staggered back a few steps. After steadying himself slightly, he pulled out his gun and turned around. Before Marcia could react, she heard a series of gunshots. And, of course, the villain's inner voice. "Damn it, I'm hit! How did he find me?" Marcia had intended to take Fabian to get his wounds treated, but with a sudden turn, he jumped from the 3rd floor. Just then, the red-haired man came over, introduced himself as Leonid, and chuckled. "Don't worry, that guy is tougher than a rock." Before Marcia could say a word, she felt a sharp pain in her head. "Damn it, I'm going to die. I knew I shouldn't have taken this mission." Overwhelmed by the malicious thought, Marcia fainted on the spot. When she woke up again, she was back in her room. The scenes of what had happened before flashed through her mind. She quickly asked, "How is Mr. Fabian?" The maid comforted her. "The Grand Duke is safe. I heard the assassin later committed suicide." Marcia was still shaken by the earlier mental assault. So, the resentment of a person before death is this powerful, but why didn't I hear his thoughts before? Finally, Marcia came to a conclusion. He was a killer, which is why he had no malicious thoughts of his own. As her mind raced, Fabian walked in. "You're finally awake, my lady!" Marcia broke out in a cold sweat. What was he up to, acting so gentle? "I have some good news to tell you." After speaking, Fabian turned slightly to the side, revealing that his assistant, Pratt, had returned. Of course, this also meant their marriage certificate had arrived. Fabian immediately announced the news to everyone. His uncle and aunt, of course, refused to believe that someone would willingly marry the son of a witch. But the more furious and exasperated they became, the happier Fabian was. "My apologies, but this is my new wife, Miss Marcia." At these words, Eloise, who was infatuated with him, turned pale with rage. "That bitch actually stole my position as the Grand Duchess." Meanwhile, the notary for the grandfather's will also arrived at the scene and announced that from this moment on, Fabian was the Grand Duke of the Laurent family. Just then, Marcia heard another negative voice. "What an idiot. If he had just sent a few more assassins, this wouldn't have happened." Just as Marcia was about to give a warning, Fabian spoke up. "Uncle, Aunt, please leave my residence immediately. Of course, before you do, please clear yourselves of the charge of murdering my grandfather." Having said his piece, Fabian didn't want to linger and argue with them any longer. The guards would naturally escort the two out. After leaving the hall, Marcia called out anxiously, "Wait, please wait. Didn't you explicitly state in the contract that you wouldn't touch me?" Fabian looked bewildered, not even holding hands. Marcia lowered her head and mumbled, "No." "Then what about when I held you earlier?" "We'll eventually run into situations like that." Marcia hesitated. He had a point. "If you still have doubts, let's define the boundaries of contact. As long as we don't touch each other during our marital duties at night, it should be fine." Such audacious words were too much. Marcia was completely unable to handle it. Meanwhile, the uncle had been taken away as a suspect, but Eloise and Richard were not implicated. However, Eloise couldn't swallow the bitter pill of the man she loved falling for someone else. She tried to incite Richard to stir up trouble with her. "If Fabian has an heir, you'll never become the Grand Duke." But to her surprise, Richard claimed to have no interest in the title of Grand Duke. Of course, he wouldn't be leaving either. After all, there was a girl here who held a fatal attraction for him. For Marcia, life as a Grand Duchess was not easy. Every day brought countless invitations for social events. Afraid of offending people, Marcia didn't dare to throw them all away. When she learned that Fabian wasn't very busy today, she decided to show him the invitations for his review. After all, he had just ascended to the position of Grand Duke, so it was always right to be cautious. Marcia cautiously approached him, and happened to notice he had 2 hair whorls on his head. She has heard that people with this trait get married twice. Just then, Fabian noticed Marcia standing so close. "My lady, is there something I can help you with? These are the invitations I've received recently, so I wanted you to see if there are any that require special attention in replying. After all, our marriage is just an act, and I'm afraid of messing up your affairs." "Please don't say that. You can enjoy all the rights of a Grand Duchess." Hearing this, Marcia said excitedly, "Really? I only have one request, and that is to get a different doctor for Larissa." In truth, the Dr. Fabian had arranged for Larissa was already very good, but Larissa's wounds were psychological. Marcia wanted a professional psychologist. To her surprise, Fabian said, "I've never seen a doctor who can heal the mind." Marcia was a little dejected. Had the medical arts of this world not advanced that far? To heal the mind, perhaps only a witch has a slight chance. Overhearing his thoughts, Marcia knew he despised witches, so she decided to ask someone else when she got the chance. Just then, Fabian suddenly asked, "Are you hiding something from me?" Marcia's heart pounded, thinking her sister's secret was exposed. She could only say vaguely, "No, you're overthinking it." "You don't need to be nervous. I was just curious if Larissa was abused." Hearing this, Marcia breathed a sigh of relief. She was prepared for this question. After getting confirmation, Fabian said grimly, "Do you need me to take care of the source of the trouble?" Marcia's face changed drastically. He was talking about killing someone. Although she didn't care about the lives of her so-called father and brother in this world, the original owner of her body had once ordered the nanny to help her extract Larissa's tears. If they were counting culprits, she would be one too. At this thought, Marcia quickly waved her hands and refused the offer, saying, "You just need to promise not to reveal Larissa's whereabouts." Fabian naturally did not refuse this request. Marcia didn't want to continue on this topic, so she asked, "How are your injuries? You wouldn't have gotten hurt if it weren't for protecting me." Fabian thought his wife was feeling guilty, so he simply undid his tie and buttons. "I'm really fine. If you don't believe me, see for yourself." Marcia's face instantly turned as red as an apple. "Don't do that, I was just asking out of concern." After this incident, Marcia couldn't stay any longer. She couldn't wait to go back and see her precious sister. The maid who saw her return looked as if she had seen a rescuer. She hurriedly reported, "The young miss refuses to eat." Marcia secretly wondered if it was because of her. Sure enough, upon seeing her sister right in front of her, Larissa's spoon began to move. Although she didn't say a word, her meaning was crystal clear. Marcia's heart was filled with mixed emotions. This only strengthened her resolve to help her sister open her heart. After the meal, Marcia suggested, "Let's go for a walk together." And so, 2 beautiful figures were added to the lovely garden. She took Larissa to admire the breathtaking sunset and described the various beautiful sights in a cheerful tone, all to let her sister personally experience the beauty of the world. Heaven rewards the diligent. Under Marcia's guidance, Larissa actually tried to smell the fragrance of the flowers. For someone who had long closed off her heart, this was a huge step. Marcia smiled knowingly, her heart softening even more. Since her sister was getting tired, she found a place nearby to rest. But someone approached from a short distance away. Richard said mournfully, "I thought I would never see you two again." Marcia, fiercely protective, quickly shielded Larissa behind her. Seeing this, Richard grew anxious and explained, "I don't mean any harm." But Marcia gave him no chance, wanting only to leave quickly. Richard hurriedly blocked their path. Then he stammered, "Can you introduce her to me?" Marcia looked down at Larissa, intending to refuse, but to her surprise, her shy little sister made eye contact with someone for the first time. Of course, Marcia was delighted to see this change, so she changed her tune. "It's not impossible for me to introduce you, but your attitude towards me used to be terrible." The prideful Richard finally dropped his pride. For the first time ever, he apologized to someone. Only then did Marcia happily introduce her precious sister to him. But after seeing his cheeks flush like a sunset cloud, Marcia was utterly bewildered. Does this guy really need to blush this much? This gave Marcia a new perspective on him. However, thinking he could win over her sister just with this was impossible. After all, she was destined to marry the male lead, Fabian. In the blink of an eye, the two had been at the Grand Duke's residence for half a month. Larissa's external injuries had completely healed. However, the doctor said she must not be frightened again, or she might have a mental breakdown and descend into madness. But judging from the current situation, things were very optimistic. Marcia was also confident she could help Larissa open her heart. At least she no longer refused to participate in some games. Watching the handsome chef constantly praising Larissa beside them, Marcia was as happy as if she had eaten honey. As a tray of cookies came out of the oven, Larissa slowly walked over to Marcia and then handed her the gingerbread cookie in her hand. Marcia held it in her palm, moved, afraid of accidentally breaking this crystal of her affection. When the baking was over, it was time for them to leave. Everyone was very reluctant to see them go and strongly invited them to come play again. Marcia asked softly, "Do you want to come again?" Although Larissa didn't speak, she nodded. Marcia was already very satisfied with this response. These days, Larissa was becoming more and more like a normal child. They had planned to go to the dining hall for a meal, but they heard the sound of laughter coming from inside. Marcia peeked in and saw it was Leonid and Richard. Leonid enthusiastically invited the two to come in and eat. Seeing this, Richard deliberately coughed a few times, obviously trying to make his presence known in front of his crush. But Marcia intentionally walked around him to the dining table, and then completely ignored Richard's existence during the conversation. Just then, a maid brought over a mango milkshake. Larissa was immediately captivated by this dish. Marcia watched her sister take a sip, and then show a happy and satisfied expression. This adorable sight simply melted her heart. But Richard's reaction made her a bit uncomfortable. What's with that expression? How dare he have improper thoughts about my sister? At that moment, Marcia wished she could gouge his eyes out. She would absolutely not allow her precious little cabbage to be nibbled by him. She quickly changed the subject, asking, "What were you guys just talking about?" Leonid laughed. "Some interesting stories from school. Fabian and we all went to the same school." Unexpectedly, just as he finished speaking, Fabian appeared. Leonid immediately started gossiping, "So tell us how you two met." Marcia was too embarrassed to know how to begin. "Once, I was out on business, and she happened to pass by and save my life." Marcia was overjoyed, thinking to herself, as expected of the Grand Duke, so concise and to the point. "And then, I fell in love with her at first sight." Everyone was stunned, and Leonid even spat out a mouthful of wine. Marcia was so flustered and annoyed she almost dropped her glass. She didn't want her sister to misunderstand anything. Luckily, Larissa was still too young to understand the meaning of love at first sight. Facing the warning glance from his wife, Fabian simply ignored it and closed his eyes. This made Marcia very uneasy. She hoped this guy won't say anything mean again. Annoyingly, Leonid was too nosy and kept asking questions. And Fabian didn't seem to have any intention of hiding anything, directly revealing the details of how the assassin was exposed at the time. Marcia quickly tried to downplay it, claiming it was just a lucky guess. Fabian smiled and said with deep meaning, "My lady is truly amazing." At this point, Marcia also realized her actions had aroused suspicion. But what could she do? All she could do was play dumb, but she didn't know how poor her acting was. Soon Richard's revenge came. "Don't tell me you staged that whole thing to get close to Fabian?" Marcia snorted disdainfully. "I didn't even know who he was back then. Then why were you paying so much attention to him?" Marcia got fired up and said matter-of-factly, "Because he's handsome." Leonid once again inelegantly sprayed out a mouthful of old wine. "Indeed, as long as you don't feel awkward, you make everyone else feel awkward." A dinner full of probing questions finally ended in farce. Of course, the clever Fabian had already confirmed certain things, but the mysterious Marcia had only piqued his interest more. After dinner, Leonid found him alone. "Is your mind completely filled with thoughts of your wife right now? You talk way too much nonsense." Leonid became uncharacteristically shy. "I'll leave after one more question. You haven't consummated the marriage with your wife yet, have you?" At night, Larissa often had nightmares. Marcia, by her side, felt heartbroken and pained. Then she noticed something in her sister's blankets. Lifting them, she saw it was the cookie they made during the day. Does this little one finally have something she likes? Overcome with emotion, Marcia couldn't help but give her a kiss. But this startled Larissa awake. She looked apologetic, worried she had scared her sister. So she explained softly, "This is called a goodnight kiss. I hope you have sweet dreams." As the beautiful lullaby filled her ears, Larissa fell asleep again, and she had a very strange dream. In it was her favorite cookie. Was she putting her mouth on your face just now to eat you? Of course not, that's called a goodnight kiss. It means if you kiss someone's cheek, they'll have a good night's sleep. In truth, Larissa didn't know the connection between kissing and sleeping either. But that tingling sensation felt really nice. That night, feeling uneasy, Marcia slept on the sofa all night. She didn't even notice when an early rising Larissa came to her side. For the first time, the withdrawn Larissa had the urge to touch someone else. Unfortunately, Marcia opened her eyes. This gave Larissa a huge fright. She immediately scurried away as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. When Marcia came to her senses, she understood what had happened. If only she had pretended to be asleep just now. But her reaction also filled Marcia with determination. Of course, her shy sister still needed to be coaxed. Luckily, their time together had made Larissa less timid. Under Marcia's coaxing, she finally revealed her head completely, unaware of the impact her adorable appearance had on Marcia. To protect her sister's fragile self-esteem, Marcia decided they would just have breakfast in the room. But the weather outside was really wonderful. She decided to take her sister for a walk after they finished eating. Just then, an unfamiliar maid walked in from outside. She introduced herself as Sophia, sent by the Grand Duke to take care of them. Marcia didn't expect Fabian, despite his busy schedule, to be so thoughtful. Sophia's voice snapped her out of her daze. The rooms of the past Grand Duchesses have been tidied up. Would you two like a tour? With nothing else to do, Marcia certainly didn't refuse. But even though she was prepared, she was still stunned by the luxurious decorations. What amazed her most was the walk-in closet. There were probably enough clothes inside to last for 3 years without repeating. So Marcia simply asked her to pick out an outfit suitable for a walk. As for Larissa, she still didn't trust anyone else to dress her. Walking and looking around, Marcia asked, "What is that room for?" Sophia said happily, "That's your and the Grand Duke's bridal chamber." Thinking of certain indescribable scenes, Marcia nearly combusted. She quickly waved her hand and said, "Let's go look at the other rooms." When the two of them walked out of the room, they had changed into new clothes. Larissa, in particular, looked very energetic. Marcia was so happy she couldn't help but hum a little tune. Suddenly, a thought echoed from all around. "That damn bitch dared to run away with my cash cow." The man's voice was like a demon's. Marcia recognized it immediately. She urgently told Larissa to hurry back to her room. But this time, Lady Luck was not on her side. Her devil of a father had already appeared before them, laughing maniacally. Larissa looked as if she had been struck by lightning, her face pale. Faced with Robert's ecstatic embrace, the two sisters looked as if they had seen a demon from hell. Larissa, especially, was on the verge of a mental breakdown. The scenes of torment from her childhood began to flash through her mind. Marcia didn't want her many days of effort to go to waste. So she turned and ordered Sophia to take the young miss away. Robert was not about to let his cash cow slip away. Marcia tried her best to stop him, wanting to talk to her father. But what she received was a heavy slap. The force was so great that it sent her stumbling back several steps. Falling to the ground, Marcia had no time to feel the pain. She saw her father getting closer and closer to her sister, and Larissa's state was extremely unstable. Disregarding the risk of being hit again, Marcia rushed forward once more. Just then, a voice came from the second floor. "So, this is the kind of person the Grand Duchess's father is." Marcia straightened her appearance and smiled. "I've made a fool of myself." Robert was furious, shouting, "I am a nobleman. And is that your reason for striking the Grand Duchess?" The guards who arrived immediately restrained him. Only then did Marcia feel a sense of relief. Just then, Fabian's assistant also arrived. He said loudly, "You two, please come with me. His Grace the Grand Duke wishes to see you." Considering he was both a nobleman and Larissa's legal guardian, Marcia couldn't use her status as Grand Duchess to act rashly. Of course, Robert knew this as well, so he only demanded Larissa. Marcia would never agree to that. She would never let her sister fall back into that pit of fire. The father and daughter were thus at a standstill. At this moment, Grand Duke Fabian finally arrived. Robert, knowing the stakes, didn't dare to be impudent. So he portrayed himself as a pitiful father who had tragically lost his beloved daughter, even claiming he wouldn't have found this place without the help of a benefactor. Marcia was shocked and asked, "Who told you?" Robert didn't hide it and revealed Eloise's name. Now the truth was out. Marcia never expected it would be her. Faced with Robert, who kept insisting on taking his daughter away, Marcia, no matter how angry, was momentarily at a loss. So she had to look to Fabian for help, and quietly reminded him about their contract. But Fabian seemed to be sulking and said nothing at all. Seeing this, Robert became even more arrogant. But when he met a pair of increasingly crimson eyes, Robert felt an involuntary shiver of fear. But the thought of not being able to take Larissa drove him completely mad. Unexpectedly, Fabian started to laugh. He then began to recount the touching story of how he fell in love with Marcia, looking at his eyes filled with tender love. Marcia was truly numb. How could he act this out so convincingly? But Robert couldn't care less about Marcia's happiness. He was running out of patience, stating bluntly that if they didn't agree, he would take the matter to the emperor. Fabian wasn't anxious, he simply asked, "If you are her father, why is Larissa so frightened she can't even walk? Besides, as you can see, her health is not suitable for a long journey." Just as Robert was about to play dirty, Fabian ordered someone to bring a box. "I know you will be lonely without Larissa's company. Please take this as some compensation from me. This is the property deed for a gold mine in the Confronting region, enough for you to dig for 100 years. Robert was tempted. His daughter's diamond tears still needed a buyer. How could that be as convenient as a gold mine? But when he learned they wanted to keep Larissa for 3 years, Robert grew agitated. After all, he wanted both the gold and the diamonds. This greedy expression made Fabian lose his patience. He demanded, "I heard you hit my wife. So, are you prepared to taste the food in the Grand Duke's prison?" After saying this, he had Robert thrown out, ignoring his protests. It was a pity his position as Grand Duke wasn't stable yet. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let a down-and-out nobleman run wild here so easily. After there were no outsiders in the room, Fabian began to check Marcia's injuries. If I had known, you should have agreed to let me send someone to assassinate him. Seeing Fabian's murderous intent, Marcia quickly said, I'm fine, and thank you so much for today. Fabian shook his head and said, it was my fault. I won't let this happen again. How dare this riffraff touch my people? Hearing this, Marcia felt a strange stirring in her heart. By the way, don't call me Your Grace anymore, just call me Fabian. At that moment, Marcia even started to suspect he might like her. Meanwhile, when Fabian returned to his study, he saw Leonid waiting for him with a wine glass. He looked at Pratt and said, who gave him wine? Leonid pretended not to hear and asked playfully, where's your father-in-law? Fabian said lazily, driven away with money, for now. It's really strange. The sisters don't want their father's love, and the younger sister seems indifferent to the older one. Hearing this, Fabian chuckled. In any case, Miss Marcia's kindness is beyond doubt. Poor Leonid had lost count of how many times he had spat out his wine. This idiot actually calls his own wife Miss, as if knowing what he was thinking, Fabian could only use disdain to hide his embarrassment. But Leonid looked as if he had discovered a secret. I get it, your marriage is completely fake, isn't it? Fabian was speechless. Was he that obvious? But how on earth could he pretend to be in love? To understand Marcia's predicament, Fabian specifically had Pratt investigate. He learned that her brother was a compulsive gambler, and her father was obsessed with business but repeatedly failed, leading to the family's finances being in a precarious state. He even found Marcia's most precious earrings in the black market. According to the investigation, her brother had sold them to pay off gambling debts. The more Fabian heard, the angrier he became, clenching his fists. He never imagined his wife would have such a family. Just then, a maid ran in, flustered. Your Grace, something terrible has happened. Miss Larissa, Marcia was afraid her sister would bite herself in her agitated state, so she actually put her hand in her mouth. At the same time, Fabian arrived outside the door. But as he went to push the door open, he froze. After all, their so-called marriage was just a transaction. What right did he have to barge in? But for some reason, he really wanted to care for Marcia. As the door was gently pushed open, he saw a tear-streaked Marcia, and Larissa, trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't escape. Watching Marcia, completely focused on comforting her sister, Fabian felt he had no place to intervene. After much thought, he could only turn to leave. But he accidentally stepped on something. Fabian bent down to pick it up and found it was a cookie. He glanced back gently at his wife, then wrapped the cookie and placed it aside. He didn't know that Richard had been waiting outside for a long time. He was very worried about Larissa's condition and wanted to know what was happening. But Fabian was in a very bad mood and said bluntly, go back. I'll inform you if there's any news. A few minutes later, in the Grand Duke's stables, Fabian, in formal attire, demanded a horse. The groom wanted to say something but was intimidated by his look and held his tongue. In the end, he could only watch as the unusually emotional Grand Duke galloped away. Having lacked familial affection since childhood, Fabian couldn't understand how Marcia could be so selfless. He clearly remembered the bite marks on her hand. He believed in her affection for her sister, but wasn't she worried that this devotion would get her hurt? For some reason, Fabian found that he was truly falling for her. If only Marcia were really his wife. Would he too be surrounded by so much love then? And far away, Marcia's brother was furious. After all, without Larissa, he no longer had any money for gambling. When he learned that his sister had become the Grand Duke's wife, he set his sights on Fabian's uncle. But Marcia was still unaware that danger was approaching. Right now, all her thoughts were on her sister. When she saw the shattered cookie on the table, she suddenly understood the reason for her sister's episode. The shock Larissa had received at the time was actually manageable, but because of a maid's carelessness, her cookie was broken. This cookie represented her hope after emerging from darkness. Now broken like this, it became the last straw that broke the camel's back. A worried Marcia silently made a decision. Without Robert's harassment, Larissa gradually regained her composure. Richard had to return to the academy to continue his studies, and Marcia was engrossed in sewing a gift. One morning, just as Larissa woke up, she found Marcia already sitting by her bed, keeping her company. But her hands, for some reason, were wrapped in bandages. It wasn't until Marcia took out a cookie doll that she vaguely understood why her fingers were injured. At that moment, Larissa's gray heart lit up once more. Looking at her silent, head-bowed sister, Marcia asked awkwardly, "Don't you like it?" But the next second, a clinking sound was heard. It was Larissa's tears turning into diamonds and falling to the ground. Marcia quickly asked with concern, "What's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" But Larissa's state was very calm, not at all like she was crying from sadness. Marcia could only hug her gently and comfort her. "It's okay to cry if you want to, perhaps tired from crying." Larissa soon fell asleep again. Marcia stroked her head, relieved, but she soon froze in shock. Unknowingly, the floor was now covered in diamonds. At this moment, she finally understood her father and brother's feelings. To hide this secret, she quickly found a bag and picked them all up. Maybe they could be her sister's private savings in the future. Meanwhile, Roger found Fabian's uncle. and asked him how he felt about having the Grand Duke title stolen. Looking at the furious and humiliated Marquis Nyes, Roger said bluntly, "I can help you reclaim the position of Grand Duke." Nyes didn't believe him. Fabian had fulfilled the old Grand Duke's will. He had no weaknesses, but Roger claimed to know a stain on Marcia's life. "As long as she can't be the Grand Duchess, can't you force the current Grand Duke to abdicate?" Of course, he had one condition: to take Larissa away. The cunning old Nyes did not agree on the spot. He just said he needed time to consider. After Roger left, he summoned his hidden confidant. It's strange. Logically, shouldn't he be happy that his sister became the Grand Duchess? There must be a secret we don't know. "From today, you will secretly monitor Roger's every move." Just as Marcia was about to find a place to hide the diamonds, there was a knock on the door behind her. She thought it was her maid, Sophia, but it turned out to be Grand Duke Fabian. She asked in surprise, "What brings you here?" Fabian was a bit strange today, stammering as he spoke. Marcia guessed, "Are you here to see Larissa? She just fell asleep and is fine now." Looking at the hesitant Grand Duke, Marcia also felt helpless. And why did he have a floral scent on him? At this moment, Fabian's heart was beating extremely fast. He composed himself slightly and finally took out what he was hiding behind his back. "Actually, I came specifically to bring you flowers today." Marcia happily took them and said in surprise, "They're hyacinths." "Yes, I just picked them from the garden. I hope you and Miss Larissa will like them." Noticing his large hands covered in dirt, Marcia's eyes couldn't help but light up. "Thank you so much. Larissa should like them too." Fabian was a bit puzzled. "You don't know what flowers your sister likes?" At this point, Marcia realized she had misspoken. She quickly changed the subject. "Your Grace is so thoughtful. My sister and I have already received so much since coming here." Hearing this, Fabian's heart filled with pity. Marcia asked worriedly, "What's wrong?" To her surprise, Fabian suddenly became emotional. "I say it's not much at all. I'll come back tomorrow with daffodils." "You're coming again? Can I come?" "All right. I have something to attend to. See you tomorrow." Fabian's unusual behavior left Marcia a bit confused. The next day, as Marcia was having breakfast with Larissa, Fabian indeed knocked on the door with daffodils. Marcia, who had thought he was joking, was a little surprised. He was clearly busy with his duties. How could he have the time to personally deliver flowers? And Fabian, as if his intelligence had dropped, said, "I promised you yesterday that I would come." Just then, Marcia felt a tug on her clothes from behind. She turned around and saw that Larissa had come out, so she smiled and handed the flowers from Fabian to her sister. From the corner of Larissa's mouth, you could tell she really loved the flowers. Marcia felt both gratified and compassionate. She invited Fabian in to dine with them, while telling Larissa about daffodils. And indeed, Larissa at this moment looked just like a flower fairy. Thinking of her future union with Fabian, Marcia couldn't help but smile. Of course, Fabian didn't know he had been sold out by her. He stared at the smiling Marcia, momentarily stunned. When he came back to his senses, he quickly turned his head away. "I heard Marquis Leonid has gone home, is that right?" Fabian was taken aback and replied, "Yes. Did something happen? Why so suddenly? Are you reluctant to see him go?" "I just feel a bit bad for not saying goodbye to him." Fabian realized he had been a bit out of line and coughed lightly. "I'll accompany you to visit him when there's a chance." During their chat, Marcia casually mentioned that she loved to dance. It helped her relax and lifted her spirits. Fabian committed this sentence to memory. Just then, Sophia came forward and said, "I'll go put the flowers in a vase." Larissa showed a look of incomprehension. So Fabian explained, "Flowers wither after being picked. Putting them in a vase can delay this." Hearing this, Larissa became a little gloomy. Marcia was afraid her mood would drop but didn't know how to console her. Fortunately, Fabian continued, "All things have their way of survival. Even if a flower withers, it will bloom again next year. So, temporary withering is just for the sake of blooming again." Marcia nodded in silent agreement. She never expected Fabian to have such a gentle and knowledgeable side. Seeing the inquisitive look in Larissa's eyes, Marcia was very pleased. When she heard Fabian say he could take her to see different kinds of flowers, Larissa seemed to light up completely. Of course, his real purpose was to invite Marcia on an outing. "In a few days, the nobles are organizing a hunt. Let's go together. But I can't ride a horse or shoot a gun." "Don't worry, that's an activity for us men. The ladies usually enjoy tea parties in the forest." Marcia was tempted, but pridefully said she would think about it. She could feel his attentiveness and importance, and for some reason she felt genuinely happy, because Fabian had a pair of crimson eyes. Eloise fell in love with him when she was 6 years old. 10 years later, she had grown into a graceful young woman. And the once destitute boy had become even more dashingly handsome. She had thought that with her status, she could easily win him over. But to her surprise, he married a girl he had only known for 3 days. Eloise was nearly consumed by the fire of jealousy in her heart. Just then, a servant knocked on the door to announce a visitor. When she learned the man was her rival's ex-fiancé, Eloise quickly invited him into the reception room. Carl, however, clearly didn't have a strong impression of Marcia anymore. After all, who would pay attention to a noble lady from a fallen family? Eloise said seriously. Your ex-fiancé was a marriage swindler, and the one she swindled was my fiancé. Hearing Eloise's story, Carl couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. He never thought the woman he'd cast aside was capable of something like this. At this point, Eloise couldn't hold back any longer. She sincerely asked him to do her a favor. But Carl, as if he had expected this, asked, "Why should I?" Eloise hadn't expected him to be so difficult. She could only ask, "Just state your conditions. I want an excellent lady for a wife." A chill instantly ran down Eloise's spine. Her lady-in-waiting warned, "Please watch your words, sir," Carl explained. "You misunderstand. I just hope you can play matchmaker for me in high society." Eloise felt a headache coming on. She had a feeling this guy was unreliable. But to win Fabian back, she couldn't afford to be picky. She immediately promised to introduce him to 10 ladies after the matter was settled. Only then did Carl agree with satisfaction. Meanwhile, Fabian suddenly remembered that Marcia liked to dance, so he ordered his assistant to find a dance instructor. This startled Pratt. "But don't you despise dancing, Your Grace?" Fabian's brow furrowed. "Can't I be interested in it now? Also, the dance instructor must be male." Pratt's mind was a complete mess. He thought to himself, the lives of nobles are truly chaotic. Just then, he suddenly remembered that someone had sent a letter to the Duchess. Fabian glanced at it out of curiosity and was stunned. It was a love letter addressed to Marcia. It asked her to meet at the opera house the day after tomorrow, and mentioned preparing a fatal poison to harm him. The final signature was of your ex-fiancé. Fabian nearly gritted his teeth to pieces as he read it. Pratt, observing his expression, said he would immediately investigate this person. Fabian, however, was calmer, suspecting it might be a malicious attempt to slander and sow discord. But Pratt reminded him that in the previous investigation, the Grand Duchess indeed had a former fiancé with whom the engagement had fallen through. Hearing these words, the color drained from Fabian's face. For some reason, even though he knew Marcia was just his wife by contract, he felt an overwhelming and bitter jealousy. But Marcia, still unaware of the approaching crisis, was busy enjoying delicious food, just as she was handing a plate of salad to Larissa. She accidentally discovered a note hidden in a teacup. On it were written the words, "War makes sure to come alone." Worried that Larissa's secret would be discovered, Marcia was vigilant about everything around her, so she immediately went to an empty adjacent room and nervously opened the mysterious note. The contents were similar to what Fabian had seen, but with an added threat: if you don't obey, the secret of the basement will be revealed. The signatory was now H. Her worst fear had come true. Marcia's heart was in turmoil. She immediately ruled out her father and brother. But besides them, who else knew Larissa's secret? Soon she thought of another person she had overlooked. And that was Larissa's wet nurse, Hal. Only she could possibly ask to meet her in such a way. Marcia, thinking she had it all figured out, was about to make preparations when she was startled by Larissa, who had just arrived. Seeing the worried look on her sister's face, Marcia was touched and became even more determined to protect her. So she said gently, "I'm going out for a bit tonight. You have to be good. I will make sure my little Larissa grows up without a single worry." Meanwhile, Fabian, holding the secret letter, felt deeply unsettled. He remembered how Marcia used to always show him her invitation letters for his review. Fabian decided to openly ask for her opinion. But when the door opened, it wasn't Marcia who greeted him. Sophia said respectfully, "The Duchess has gone out on an errand." Fabian asked sensitively, "Did she say where she was going?" Sophia answered truthfully, "No," but her grace seemed a little distressed. Hearing this, the ominous feeling in Fabian's heart grew stronger. He immediately turned and ordered, "Prepare a carriage for me." At the same time, on the way to the opera house, Marcia was thinking with a serious expression about how to handle the situation. Marcia arrived at the opera house as scheduled. She found that the mysterious person hadn't arrived yet, and that he had chosen a particularly conspicuous spot. This left her a bit baffled. Was he afraid that people wouldn't see them? Just then, the sound of a door opening came from behind her. "You're already here. It's been a while, I've missed you dearly." Meanwhile, Fabian had also arrived at the opera house. When he learned that Marcia had snuck in using an alias, his mood instantly soured to the extreme. Eloise, who had been waiting nearby, pretended it was a chance encounter, but inwardly she was blooming with delight. But Fabian shoved her away rudely, and then silently walked towards his family's exclusive VIP box. Eloise was so angry she nearly gritted her teeth to pieces. She refused to believe Fabian could remain indifferent after seeing his wife cheat on him. As the two of them headed to the terrace, Carl also began his performance. He greeted as he approached Marcia, and Marcia was a bit slow to react. The letter had clearly mentioned the secret of the basement, but logically, the man in front of her couldn't possibly know about it. Carl was solely focused on completing Eloise's task, so he didn't care at all about what was written in the letter. Carl said, "I just wanted to ask you out, so I wrote whatever, from the noble Grand Duke's private box." Fabian had the most expansive view of the entire opera house, so it was easy for him to spot Marcia directly opposite him. Of course, this was also part of Eloise's careful arrangement, watching the two of them constantly interacting. Fabian's expression turned extremely grim. Eloise, in contrast, wore a gloating smile. Seeing the man suddenly and inexplicably lean in, Marcia immediately pushed him away and demanded, "Why are you so close?" Carl, unfazed, began to speak of his lovesickness. Marcia didn't believe a word. She only wanted to know if he held Larissa's secret. But she couldn't just ask him directly. The situation came to a standstill. Unbeknownst to them, Eloise was making sarcastic remarks from the other side. She could clearly see Fabian's inner turmoil, and that was exactly the outcome she desired. So she started to slander Marcia with added embellishments, saying how could such a person be worthy of being the Grand Duchess? She was tarnishing the Laurent family's name. Hearing this, Fabian suddenly jolted, and then inexplicably burst into laughter. Eloise was baffled. She was actually worried he might have gone mad from the shock. But in reality, Fabian had remembered something. He had once personally promised Marcia that she could do anything to tarnish the Laurent family name, because his ultimate goal was to destroy this family. But Marcia had always been careful to protect the reputation of the Grand Duchess, so why would she cross that line now? Eloise realized something was wrong and shouted, "Your wife is having an affair, aren't you angry?" Fabian, having regained his composure, slowly raised his head, and then stared at her with increasingly crimson eyes. Eloise couldn't help but feel guilty and afraid. As expected, Fabian sneered, "Let's end this prank here. My time is precious, and you should go home early too." Eloise knew it was all over. She yelled, "You know I love you, so why do you always ignore me?" Fabian said coldly, "Even if I had 100 chances, I would never choose you." Eloise's heart trembled. She asked, "Why?" "That woman is just a tool to you. Because I don't like you at all. And how do you know that I don't like her? Maybe at the beginning, she and I were just a transaction. But you don't know the wonder of love. I've already— "Don't say it!" Eloise suddenly shouted, cutting him off. This was the last shred of dignity she had left. Just then, Fabian was startled by a noise from the next box. It turned out Carl had brought over a glass of fruit wine. Marcia, worried he had drugged it, would never drink it. This action successfully enraged Carl. He immediately forgot his agreement with Eloise and was about to get physical. At the critical moment, Fabian leaped over the railing without hesitation. Just then, a familiar scent wafted from behind her. It was Fabian, who had just crossed over from the opposite box. Marcia was full of questions. The door was clearly on the other side. At this moment, Fabian was having trouble controlling his emotions, and he kept pouring out his worries to Marcia. Carl, who had been arrogant just a moment ago, was instantly silenced, especially with Fabian's terrifyingly crimson eyes. After a moment's thought, he prepared to flee, but Fabian's large hand reached him first. "Where are you going, Viscount Carl?" Carl never expected him to know his identity. At this rate, he probably wouldn't be able to survive in aristocratic circles anymore, so he had no choice but to confess that he was acting under someone's orders. But Fabian already knew the truth of the matter, so after teaching him a lesson, he let him go. Carl, being petty, deliberately turned back and said, "Keep a better eye on your cousin." By now, he thoroughly hated Eloise for instigating him, but he didn't know that Marcia had the ability to hear negative thoughts. However, facing an angry Fabian, she had no time for anything else. She quickly explained that she was innocent and hadn't intentionally met a strange man. But to her surprise, that wasn't what Fabian cared about. He asked with a tremor in his voice, "If something had happened to you, what would I have done?" Marcia froze. Was this reaction concern for her? "From now on, I forbid you from going out alone. At the very least, Sophia must accompany you, so that I can find you when you need me." Marcia found it hard to meet his intense gaze. Then Fabian uncharacteristically extended his hand and said with feigned anger, "If there's a next time, I'll be angry." Marcia asked guiltily, "Aren't you afraid I might actually have an affair?" "I know you won't, because Larissa is the only one in your heart." Hearing this, Marcia turned her head away shyly. In truth, a large part of why she initially took care of Larissa was out of fear of death, since the original Marcia had died at his hands for that very reason. Just as Fabian was hesitating whether to confess to the woman he loved, Marcia suddenly thought of something and shouted, "Eloise is in danger!" Meanwhile, Eloise was leaving in a state of despair. Heaven knows how painful it is to be hated by the one you love. Just then, she suddenly felt someone behind her. She turned to see it was Carl, who was sweating profusely but had a wicked grin on his face. Eloise felt not a shred of guilt about this. She rejected his large hand offering support, but as she was boarding the carriage, she realized something was wrong. She was just about to turn and shout that this wasn't her carriage, when a large hand forcefully pushed her inside. As the carriage sped up, Eloise said in shock, "Are you crazy? What are you doing?" Carl didn't answer, instead asking, "What do you think? It's all your fault I've been kicked out of high society." Eloise argued, "Even so, I can still arrange a good marriage for you." Carl flew into a rage. "I've crossed the Laurents, I'm finished. So, after thinking it over, I've decided you're eloping with me." Eloise was terrified but feigned composure. I am a Marquis's daughter, but Carl had already planned his escape route. I've already arranged for a secret manor. Once the deed is done between us, everything will fall into place. No matter how fierce Eloise had been before, she was still just a young woman. Now, she was completely terrified by the man's brutality. She screamed frantically for help, but no one responded. Just when she thought she was doomed, the carriage suddenly began to shake violently. Carl panicked and yelled, "What's going on outside?" When he saw the Grand Duke's attendants outside, he intended to crash through the door and escape, but the next second, a pistol was pressed against his head. Watching Carl being taken away, Eloise realized she had been saved. The person who had come was Fabian's assistant, Pratt. In response to Eloise's sincere thanks, Pula bowed and said, "I was only following orders. The one you should truly thank is Her Grace, the Grand Duchess." Meanwhile, because Pula had ridden off with one of the horses, Marcia had to walk home by herself. Fabian suggested, "Why don't you ride with me on my horse?" Marcia said shyly, "That's not necessary." But faced with the handsome man's request, she ultimately couldn't resist the temptation and agreed. Fabian, having gotten his wish, smiled so wide his eyes nearly disappeared. And so, an ambiguous atmosphere began to fill the quiet forest. Since it was her first time riding, Marcia was a bit uncomfortable. Fabian, afraid she would fall, quickly wrapped his arm around her. At that moment, Marcia felt like her heart was about to leap out of her chest. Fabian also noticed her tense body and asked with concern, "Are you scared? I can ride a bit slower." Marcia was speechless. This was just too intimate. So she had to change the subject by making small talk. But the two of them were just too close, especially since Fabian was incredibly handsome. A moment later, Marcia was so shy she couldn't even speak. Oblivious, Marcia instinctively avoided the emotional question. She didn't want to usurp her sister's destined male lead. However, when she pushed open Larissa's door, she found the bed empty. It turned out she was sitting alone in the living room, waiting for her sister to come home. Marcia went up to her with a look of concern. "Why aren't you asleep yet? Were you waiting for me?" Larissa nodded seriously, and then let out a very long yawn. Marcia's heart nearly melted. She couldn't help but hug her tightly, praising what a good girl Larissa was. And she didn't see her emotionally scarred sister smile for the first time. And with Marcia's company to lull her to sleep, Larissa soon fell into a sweet dream. Marcia couldn't help but smile. Now it was time to deal with the informant. Sophia, truly an elite maid sent by Fabian, quickly caught the servant who had secretly slipped the note. The girl was not much older than Larissa. For her sister's safety, Marcia steeled her heart. First, she dismissed all the other servants, then looked down at the girl. "Speak. Who ordered you to do this?" The young maid said with a terrified expression. "It was a stranger. She gave me some money. I really don't know who she was." Marcia didn't reply, instead focusing her power to listen to her thoughts. "Anyway, that person said the Grand Duchess is brainless, so I just have to stick to my story." An idea formed in Marcia's mind. She decided to bluff. "Actually, I've already caught your accomplice. She's being interrogated by Fabian in the next room right now. From now on, I will ask you 3 questions. If even one of your answers is different from your accomplice's, I will have you branded on your face." How is that possible? Nicole is supposed to be hiding at the jewel workshop. Hearing this, Marcia couldn't help but smile with satisfaction. As expected, once she mentioned Nicole's name, the girl confessed everything. The mastermind was Miss Eloise, and Nicole was the intermediary. Marcia quickly called for Sophia and ordered her to go to the jewel workshop and arrest someone named Nicole. The young maid asked, bewildered, "Were you just tricking me?" Marcia beamed, all traces of her earlier fierce demeanor gone. Honestly, it was so hard to play the villain, but for Larissa's safety, she had to do it. A few days later, she interrogated Nicole in the same way, and learned that Eloise had been investigating her family and had a vague feeling that the basement held a secret. There wasn't much Marcia could do about it, so she decided to take things one step at a time. One day, with a heavy heart, she went to find Fabian. He was personally brewing her a cup of tea. Marcia adjusted her mood and accepted it with a smile. But Fabian had clearly noticed something and asked, "Did you need me for something? Lately, I've been very troubled about our married life." Fabian broke out in a cold sweat. When he learned she was referring to the servants, suspecting they weren't a real couple, he felt both disappointed and relieved, letting out a sigh. But then Marcia bluntly suggested they share a room to dispel the rumors. Fabian couldn't help but turn his head away shyly. As the saying goes, one is upright without desires. Clearly, his heart was no longer pure. But Marcia, still unaware of his affection for her, casually said, "I won't touch you. You can have the bed, I'll sleep on the sofa." Fabian hesitated, wondering if he should confess his feelings. But Marcia thought he was reluctant, and even said, "If you get bored, how about we play some fun games all night?" Fabian covered his face, a little unsure if she was making an innuendo. In the end, they agreed to start sharing a room that night. That evening, after putting Larissa to sleep, Marcia, wearing carefully chosen pajamas, headed to her room, carrying a box of toys with her. However, what Marcia didn't expect was that the room was decorated with all sorts of exquisite rose-scented candles. At that moment, Marcia was about to lose her mind. Who on earth did this? She was terrified Fabian would misunderstand and think it was her doing. Before she could even breathe a sigh of relief, the door opened. And Fabian, after just a casual glance at her, immediately widened his crimson eyes. It couldn't be helped. Marcia was glistening with a light sweat, looking incredibly alluring in her sexy nightgown. Fabian turned his head away, silently chanting, "Avert your eyes." But she excitedly shouted, "Traitor!" at him. Fabian asked uneasily, "What did I do wrong? We agreed to pretend to sleep together, so why are you wrapped up so tightly?" After saying that, she actually moved closer and started to act. Fabian clutched his collar and kept backing away. Marcia thought she had done something wrong. Seeing Fabian about to start working with a stack of documents, she quickly stopped him. "Stay up and play with me. I've thought of lots of fun things we can only play at night." Just as a blushing Fabian's mind was running wild, Marcia laid out various cards and dice. And to make the game more interesting and last longer, she proposed that the loser had to drink a cup of wine as a penalty. Fabian, worried about what might happen after drinking, immediately refused. Marcia was clearly in a good mood and laughed. "I'm just kidding. The loser just has to grant the winner one wish." This time, Fabian finally agreed, but because the cards were new and slippery, Fabian, who had just cut his nails, had trouble picking them up. Marcia said enthusiastically, "Let me help you." And just like that, their hands happened to touch. In that instant, the room fell eerily silent. They could almost hear each other's frantic heartbeats. Fabian was the first to react, pulling his hand back. Marcia let out a breath and quickly changed the subject. It's unclear if Fabian was doing it on purpose, but Marcia somehow managed to win 10 rounds in a row. She said, embarrassed, "It's no fun if you keep losing. Let's play something else." Fabian smiled. "Then let's play one last round." This time, he actually drew 3 aces. So Fabian proposed asking a question. "Why do you want Larissa to become the Grand Duchess?" Marcia hadn't expected him to ask that. She was just following the plot of the book to move the story forward. But how could she possibly tell him that? Seeing her hesitate, Fabian smiled. "If you don't want to say, we'll just consider it a condition you owe me." The carefree Marcia immediately cheered up, unaware of how her charm was affecting Fabian at every moment. As time went on, Marcia, who had insisted on pulling an all-nighter, was the first to fall asleep. Only then did Fabian truly breathe a sigh of relief. Heaven knows how much restraint he had to exercise that night. Before, even holding hands wouldn't have provoked any thoughts. But now, just being near her made him blush uncontrollably. Even the hand she had just touched was red and burning hot. Fabian gazed affectionately at Marcia. He was afraid she would get a stiff neck from her sleeping position, so he wanted to carry her to the large bed. Marcia, sensing the movement, couldn't help but shift her position, which scared Fabian so much that he froze on the spot, not daring to move. Fortunately, it wasn't long before Marcia fell sound asleep again. After placing her gently on the bed, Fabian couldn't help but feel a stir of affection. At the critical moment, he swallowed hard, silently wondering when his self-control had gotten so weak. He sat down on the nearby sofa with a heavy heart. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. The next day, Marcia slept in very late. When Sophia mentioned, "The master instructed us to prepare breakfast," Marcia remembered that she had embarrassingly fallen asleep. The maids had clearly misunderstood the situation. Marcia drank her tea, feigning composure, and thought to herself, finally a success. But if this continued, what would she do tonight? After racking her brain to no avail, Marcia decided to go out for some fresh air. Sophia suggested, "The view in the rear garden is quite lovely." So she immediately called for Larissa to go admire the flowers with her. Unexpectedly, there was even a swing in the garden. Larissa sat on it nervously. She had thought swinging would be scary, but instead it gave her a feeling of flying. By now, Larissa was becoming more and more like a normal child, which filled Marcia with determination. More importantly, Larissa no longer rejected other people, which made Marcia very relieved. She sat on a chair, sipping her tea gently, and Fabian's image unconsciously came to her mind. Just then, the sound of footsteps startled her. It was Larissa, who had finished playing and came over to rest. Marcia took out a fairy tale book she had prepared earlier from her side, but before she could start reading, she heard someone calling her name. She looked up and saw that it was Fabian, and he had brought a small pony with him. The little pony couldn't resist sticking out its tongue to lick Larissa. In her panic, Larissa took a hard fall. Marcia almost shrieked with worry, but for some reason, Larissa suddenly blushed. Fabian comforted her, "Don't be afraid, it only licked you because it likes you." Only then did Larissa nod shyly. Seeing her sister so happy made Marcia very content. But Fabian's face suddenly turned red with shyness. He found his resistance to Marcia growing weaker and weaker. Seeing that Marcia had noticed him, he quickly turned his head away. But his beet-red ears betrayed him. Luckily, Larissa came over at the critical moment. Marcia immediately understood what she meant, and invited Fabian to sit down for tea and a chat. An hour later, Fabian had to leave for some business. Marcia stood up and said, "I'd like to talk to you alone for a moment." It turned out she wanted to apologize for falling asleep last night. But Fabian gritted his teeth, and then said resolutely, "Actually, you don't have to do this," Marcia asked, confused. "What do you mean? I'm saying we don't need to share a room anymore. After last night, the servants shouldn't gossip anymore." Marcia lowered her head to hide her sadness, and then refused Fabian's kind offer to walk her back to her room. She was actually a very proud person. Maybe she shouldn't have gotten her hopes up. From that day on, Fabian sent all sorts of gifts every day, including special outfits for horse riding practice. Marcia didn't know whether to praise him for being thoughtful or extravagant. However, Larissa looked quite stylish in them, but she still preferred her sister to wear cuter clothes. For a moment, Marcia was caught in a dilemma. A confused Larissa widened her eyes, not understanding what her sister was up to.